I've taken care of a few details while things were drying, and I finished the 2 leaves, and we couldn't put those in before because all the surrounding leaves were wet. I did a little bit of detail work in the center here, and basically I just did every other one a light green and dark green, and then left a couple of spots for some background blue. And I also had one little mistake right here. I had painted an underside of the petal green, so I lifted a little bit of green off of that and just checked everything around. I put a few twigs in, and we'll see how that works out when we put the background on. If we don't like it, we could probably lift most of that off. So I will next do some ultraviolet on the petals. It's the next layer on the petals. I have a very dilute mix of ultramarine violet, and I'm going to be looking at my reference photo and painting just to make sure. That way I'll know basically where to place the purple. Start up in this area. And I won't rub it too much because I don't want any of the underlayer to come off, but it's plenty dry. See how it's changing the look of the petals. It's giving it a little depth. Whoops. That's a good lesson there. Got some on my hand. Let's see if we can lift that up real quickly. No problem. These are pretty much transparent, so you'll be able to see the colors coming up through the violet. And we can always add more. This is just a first layer. I think I'll let that dry for a few minutes and we will work on the background. There's one thing I can do right now. There are a couple of spots where the underneath part of the petals are showing. You have a little one right here, you have a section here, and there's a little section there. I could go ahead and do those. Might choose to mix some of the magenta color with a little bit of the purple to make it a little bit darker. is where some of the underneath of the petal is showing. It's pretty dark. I just want to add just a little bit more purple in a couple spots that I see here, a little bit more of the violet. I'm just going to soak up a little of that to make it dry a little bit faster. Well, we are going to make a big transition now and do some of the background, which is going to be a sky blue, very similar to cerulean blue. And I'm going to use a lot of water and then drop some very concentrated sky blue onto the area closest to the center here and let it spread out. If it doesn't look good, then we can always bring the rest of the paint out and spread it out to the edges. So I'm going to do a little bit of experimenting actually on the original painting that is in the booklet. I had intended on doing this background. I didn't like it, so I just moved the paint off to the side and just spread it all out. So there are a lot of things you can do. If it doesn't look good, you can make a correction and everything will be fine. So don't panic if it doesn't look very well. But we're going to try again and see how it looks. And I'm going to paint over some of these leaves that are in the background and then leave some that are not painted over. You see how it does. And I'm going to divide these into sections. I have some sky blue here mixed up, very concentrated, and I'm going to divide these into pretty small sections, probably about 5 or 6 sections as I go around. First thing I'm going to do is add a lot of water, and I'm going to bring it all the way out to the edge, and I'm also going to bring it, for example, this first section, I think I'll go from here to about here. And I'm going to bring the water out a little bit past where I intend on going with the paint. And that should keep everything good and wet. So let's try it. I also am working on a slant. I may have to turn the paper as I go just to see. I also decided I was going to do a little bit of sienna. I might do that later. Let's see. I'll mix up a little bit right now just to use this just to speed things up a little bit. I may put a little sienna underneath. That'll work. Okay. Let's get this good and wet. It has to be good and wet. Very wet. I'm going over my intended area. You see how much water I'm putting on there. I'm going to turn it this way so I can control the paint a little bit better, and then I'm going to turn it up a little bit to get it to run. You see, basically you only have to touch it. You see that? It's pretty cool when it works right. See how it's running? I'm going to tip it up so I can start running, and if you have a few spots, you can doctor those up later. A few white spots or whatever. Because it's so wet, it will just start running. I'm going to go over this green leaf and see what it does. You basically can stay pretty close to the leaves and just let the paint run. Now you have to work relatively quickly, so I'm going to go ahead and wet the next section. May have to use a smaller brush to get into these little spots here. I'm going to turn it this way now because I am on a slant, so it will continue to run down. I'm just going to do this small section here. You want to be able to control it and do what you want it to do. The main problem that I see is most people don't get it wet enough so it doesn't run as much as they would like. And if you have to, I don't think that one is quite, I don't like to mess with it too much, but you could try to put some more water on it. Sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. Doing pretty well. I could have got that a little wetter. You have to be patient. If you don't like the effect, you can always come back later with a very wet brush and just pull that paint out, maybe add some more, pull it out, and just bring it up to the edge if you don't like it. Now this is a little trickier here. You might try doing this later. You could, these little tiny areas here, and just fill it in. I'm going to go right over that brown twig. I think I'll go to this section here, cover this whole area, get in these tight spaces first. Oops, I went over that green leaf a little bit. I think I'll wait and just fill that little tiny spot in later. So you can choose what background you would like to do if you would like to try this painting. Just remember to make it very, very wet so it spreads. That's what most people make a mistake on, just making it not wet enough. There's a lot of pooling of water right here, so I'm going to go ahead and dab that up. And turn it. The more you turn it, if you turn it way up, it will, I know you can't see that, but I just want to turn it up for a second so I can get it to run. Okay. Now, I think I might just do a small section here because I'm probably, I'm going to go ahead and try to fill that in. You could choose to just do that later with a smaller brush. Now, I think this is dry enough, this section here that I did a few minutes ago. It should be dry. I'm just going to go over this leaf and I'll leave this one exposed. We'll see when it dries. You might still be able to see it just a little bit. I'm up to this section here, so I'm going to go just a little beyond with the water. The paint will only run where you have wet it unless it's pulling up too much, like right here. I'm tilting it. It may go into that green leaf, so I have to be careful. But it's only going to run where you have wet it. It's kind of interesting. Let me get this excess off. There's a little white space there. I'm going to leave that because it makes it look a little interesting. If you go over the lines a little bit, you can correct that later if you want to. You don't have to. You can always lift that up some. I think I want just a little more to come out here. Let's see if we can get it to come out a little bit more. All right, we'll move on. I will come up to this next twig. That'll be the next section. So I don't have to really wet past that. I'm not going to paint over this one. Paint over some and leave some exposed. You see how much paint I mixed up. I try to make sure I mix up plenty, just so I don't have to stop and run out, because then things start drying out on you and that's when you start to have problems. Just try to make sure you have enough to go the distance. Oh, I like that. It's like a spider web or a snowflake, but it does even itself out after a while. It continues to do that as it dries. Must not have it quite wet enough right here. Let's try to help it along a little bit. I had intended on putting some sienna underneath here, but I'm having so much fun with this blue, I think I'm just going to keep going with the blue. You could choose to put some sienna up under here. You can check the reference painting and you'll see that I did use some sienna on the bottom, but this is kind of pretty. I think I'm going to stick with this. I'm going to go right over this little branch here. I keep forgetting to put that down when I'm adding the water, so I hope that you'll be able to see it okay. Well, that was fun. Let me do a little bit of touch-ups just before I let this dry. If I can get in there without putting my hand on anything. This is probably dry right here. Let the blue peek through there a little bit in the middle. And there's a spot here. And you can go around. I'm sure there are a few little areas you might want to correct. It's pretty wet here. Okay. We're going to let that dry. And when we come back, we will do some more details on the petals. I'll do some darker pink. And then we'll probably do these pistils and stamens in here when everything dries. So we'll be back in just a little bit. The background is good and dry, and I've completed one of the flowers. I'm going to do the other one now. And so you can see all the details, and then one other little feature down on the leaves, and we will be done with this. First thing will be some darker highlights, kind of a dark pink, perhaps some shadowing, I guess you would call that. I'm just going to go around and accent some of these violet areas, and also try to smooth off some of the edges on the violet areas so they don't look like such hard edges. Again, just to give a little more depth to the petals. I think I may have to let the middle of this flower and the rest of the petals dry just a touch before I do the pistil and the stamens. If you'll notice on the reference painting, there are 10 stamens, those are the male parts, and 1 pistil, that's the female part, and we'll get those in just a minute. So while those are drying, I'd like to show you something I did with the leaves. In the beginning of the lesson, I mentioned that the new growth is a very light green and it's also fuzzy. So to get that fuzzy effect, I'm going to take the X-Acto knife and I'm going to scrape out some edges on the leaves to make it look like fuzz. So I've done this one here, I'm just going to scrape out some, etching it out. It's going to create a little bit of the paper to come up, so I will need to brush that off before I continue, just so I don't get the rest of it on anything else that I'm going to paint. You see how that is making it look like it's fuzzy? I'm literally scraping off the first layer of paper. And I'm just going to do the two biggest light green leaves. I've already done this one a little bit. I'm just going to do it along the edges, even though the whole surface is fuzzy. You could scrape out a few if you wanted to in the middle of the leaf. And I'm going to brush that off. I think this middle part is probably dry enough now that I can do the stamens. Now, if you can't see them after you've put all these layers on the petals and you don't feel confident looking at the reference photo, you can take your original tracing, lay it down on here as long as the paint is dry enough, and attach it like we did when we transferred the sketch, and put your graphite paper under there and retrace the stamens and the pistil if you need to. That's a possibility. I can still see mine slightly, so I think that's good enough. I'm just going to wing it. But if you need to, you can always retrace. If you put so many layers on your painting and then you can't see the rest of the lines, you can always do that. I mixed up a little bit of alizarin crimson and the permanent magenta, and I'm going to use that for the filaments so that you can see them a little bit better against all that pink. So we'll try this liner brush. There are 10 stamens, so you need to make sure you get them all. You could mark the tops if you wanted to, just a little bit, so it makes it a little easier to see the anthers. So we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. All right, that'll help. Remember, it will fade a little bit, so it's okay if it's a little dark. I've got to do the pistil. The pistil always extends out farther out into the petal area. Just to make sure the anthers show up, I'm going to use some sepia and some burnt umber. While I'm at it, I'm going to make this throat area a little bit darker. Carefully bring it out. Fade it in. That will dry lighter. Might need to let that dry a little bit before I work that anymore. So I have to do the little hash marks on the petals. Now that I'm going to make sure I make that nice and dark. I'm going to put some permanent magenta and the alizarin crimson, but it's just going to be a pretty strong mix. and they're really only on one petal and just partial on two other petals. Just the little hash marks. Try to follow the lines of the veins in the petals. You'll have to use a real small brush for that. I need to switch to a liner brush. Make sure they're good and dark. There are just a few coming out of this adjacent petal here. I was worried about the middle here, but it's drying okay. I could probably put a little more purple in there if that's a little too red. The only other thing I would like to do, and then we're going to call this done, is to lift a few highlights on the petals. I'm going to take a moist brush, not too much water on it, and there are some light areas on the petals. This will really help make them pop out. So I'm wetting that a little bit. Lift some of that out. So it's okay if the petals were a little darker than you wanted, because you can always lift some paint out. See how much prettier that made that look? Just don't get too carried away with it. Get one of your stiffer brushes. I won't spend too much time on this, but you can just go around to all of them. Be careful with these that were just done if they're still wet. You could use one of your scrubber brushes if you have a scrubber brush. I just don't like using those as much because it pulls up too much of the paper and you start to get fibers coming up. I switched to a little bit of a stiffer brush. Also, you can soften some of the hard edges if you need to or want to. The magenta is a permanent color, but some will still lift off. You won't get all of it off, but enough of it will lift off to where you'll get some nice highlights. Look how that makes that pop out. I have to be careful because that's probably still wet right there. Pretty cool. Let's do some over here. And also this one right here, the light is catching me, so it would be important to lighten those up a little bit. But you can see the effect. It looks pretty good. You can fiddle with that a little bit more if you want to. Here's one right here. Let me get that real quick. It's pretty light right here. Oh yeah, that looks good. Alright. Well, this has been a lot of fun, and I love painting azaleas. I think this one is completed, and it turned out pretty well. We're going to call this one done. Thank you for joining me. I hope these 5 lessons have helped you build a good foundation for accomplishing your own watercolor paintings. If these lessons have been helpful to you, please subscribe to this channel and you will be notified of future lessons and tips. I thank you for your support and interest as I plan future series. And don't forget to keep on practicing.